They told me dogs don't survive in the wild for long, especially not in our part of Idaho. Black bears, mountain lions, cold nights that sink down below freezing even in spring. But exactly 1 year after my daughter disappeared, a hunter's drone picked up something moving under the trees. It wasn't a person, it was Buddy, our dog, tied to a tree, alive. Before we begin, tap subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to forget, and make sure no name disappears without a trace. My name is Marissa Ewing. I'm 42 and I've lived in Lakemont, Idaho my whole life. I work as a nurse over at the county hospital, nights mostly. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work. Quiet town, good people. The kind of place where folks wave from their porch and drop off casseroles when someone's sick. I used to think we were safe here, tucked between the forest and the mountains, surrounded by lakes and old logging roads. Adrienne, my daughter. She grew up knowing every trail, every tree root underfoot. She was smart, bookish, a little stubborn. Turned 17 last spring. Our routines were simple. Saturdays, she'd take Buddy, our golden retriever, for a morning walk down the Centennial Trail. Always back by 10. I'd have breakfast waiting, she'd complain about her biology homework, and we'd move on with the day. There wasn't any warning. No strange cars on the road. No one lurking around the school. Just a stretch of days that felt exactly like the one before. We were coming out of a long, wet spring. The kind where everything smells like pine needles and damp earth. Adrienne had just wrapped up junior year. She was already talking about pre-med programs. University of Washington was her dream. I was proud of her quietly the way moms are. And she was doing well in school, especially science. Her biology teacher, Mr. Chandler, had taken a special interest in her progress. Said she was one of the brightest he'd ever taught. She started staying after class to review material, trying to pull her B up to an A. I didn't think anything of it. It sounded like she was finally taking herself seriously. I noticed a shift that June. She seemed more tired, easily rattled. Kept saying she needed to catch up, that she couldn't fall behind. I chalked it up to pressure. Junior year can be brutal, and she never liked to disappoint. One afternoon, I asked if she wanted to come out to dinner with me, just the two of us. Her shoulders tensed. "I've got study hall," she said. "Mr. C is letting me prep for senior coursework." I smiled, told her I was proud. She nodded, but something in her face didn't look proud. It looked afraid. I didn't push. I wish I had. That Saturday morning started the same as every other. I was off shift. She came downstairs in leggings, and her old hoodie clicked Buddy's leash and said, "Be back in a bit." I didn't even look up for my coffee. She closed the door behind her, and that was the last time I saw her. I didn't start to worry until Buddy didn't come back either. That was the first real sign something was wrong. Adrienne was 17, independent, sure, but never careless. And Buddy, he was attached to her at the hip. She didn't go anywhere without that dog, not since she got him for her 16th birthday. When the clock crept past 11 and the trailhead parking lot was still empty, I drove the route myself. The Centennial Trail was quiet that day. Hot sun filtering through the pine trees. No parked cars. No shoe prints I could make out. No leash left behind. I called her cell. Straight to voicemail. I walked the stretch between the bridge and the library, thinking maybe she'd gone in early to study, but the librarian said she hadn't been there. That's when I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Moore met me outside the station with a clipboard and the kind of cautious tone they use when they think it's just teenage drama. I told him this wasn't that. Adrienne wasn't the type to sneak off or rebel. She had plans, college applications, AP summer assignments she'd never leave half-finished. She didn't even have a driver's license yet. They took the report, noted the time, logged the trail she usually walked, said they'd put out an alert. That first night I didn't sleep. I left the porch light on, thinking maybe she'd walk back into view, Buddy trotting beside her, like this was all just a mix-up. But by morning, the air had changed. The Lakemont Search and Rescue Team started sweeping the trail. Volunteers came with dogs, drones, and printed flyers. They combed the woods for days. No disturbed brush, no torn clothing, no footprints leading off trail, not even a dropped phone. And most chilling, no sign of Buddy either. You'd think a golden retriever would have been easier to track than a teenager. But he was just as gone. As the days turned into weeks, tips slowed to a trickle. Someone thought they saw a girl matching her description in Spokane, but traffic cams came back with nothing. One woman swore she'd seen a dog like Buddy in a neighborhood park 3 towns over. That lead went nowhere. Every time the phone rang, I braced for news, and every time it was a wrong number or a neighbor asking if I needed anything, the ache in my chest got heavier. I started learning the difference between a missing persons case and a cold one. Her room stayed the same. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. Her homework sat half-finished on her desk books, stacked neatly by subject. The calendar on the wall still marked the date of her next tutoring session. She'd written Mr. C, Bio Review, 3:30 in her usual purple pen. I stared at that square for hours some nights. A few months in Principal Morrison invited me to speak at the school assembly. They planted a tree in Adrian's honor, a maple right in the quad. Her classmates tied notes and ribbons around its trunk. Mr. Chandler spoke too. He kept it short. Said Adrian was one of the rare ones and that she'd had a mind made for science. His voice never cracked. He had that same clean, calm posture he always had, that quiet authority teachers learn to carry. Afterward, he came over to speak to me. Said he couldn't imagine the pain, that if there was anything he could do, anything at all, I just had to ask. I thanked him. That's all I could manage. But something in his expression, it lingered. Not pity, not sadness. Something else. I told myself I was projecting. Grief makes you suspicious of everyone. By December, the local news stopped calling. The posters started to fade from the telephone poles. And Buddy. No one talked about him anymore. It was like he'd vanished into smoke. Then came the call. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I was folding laundry when the landline rang. The voice on the other end was calm professional. Detective Marcus Holbrook. He said he needed to speak with me in person, said it was about Adrian's case. My heart went still. I asked if something had been found. He didn't answer directly, just said he'd be over within the hour. When he arrived, the morning light was just starting to push through the blinds. He stood on my porch in a heavy jacket, breath visible in the cold. Through the peephole, I could see the weight in his face. I opened the door slowly, already bracing for the worst. Mrs. Ewing. He said, we received a call early this morning. A hunter, Dale Morrison, was using a thermal drone to track elk patterns out in Coeur d'Alene National Forest. His equipment picked up an unusual heat signature. I felt myself step backward without meaning to. My hand gripped the doorframe. He thought it was a coyote. At first. Holbrook continued pulling out a tablet from his case, but when he maneuvered the drone closer, he realized it wasn't. It was a dog, tied to a tree. He turned the screen toward me. I saw grainy thermal footage, gray and white shapes moving slightly in the wind, and in the center, a heat source curled low to the ground. It's a golden retriever, he said. We believe it's Buddy. My knees nearly gave out. Buddy, after a full year. I asked where they found him. Holbrook gave me the coordinates 15 miles northeast near the Bunko Road trail access. Remote, he said. Densely wooded. I asked if Adrian was there. He said the dog had been recovered alone. But, and this is what stayed with me, he said Buddy had been fed, recently. They'd pumped his stomach at the clinic and found traces of dry kibble. Fresh. Within the last 12 hours. We got in the car, drove out to the emergency vet clinic just off Highway 95. I remember the way my hands shook against the dashboard the entire ride. I kept thinking, who feeds a dog for a year and leaves him tied to a tree? At the clinic, Dr. Chen met us at the door. She walked me back to an exam room, and there he was. Buddy. Sedated, still groggy, but alive. His coat was matted, his ribs showed. But when I touched him, his body was warm. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my fingers. I whispered his name and watched his tail twitch in response. Dr. Chen pointed out rope burns on his neck. Said they were recent. Said he'd been restrained, but also cared for. She noted something else. His collar. "This isn't the original one, is it?" she asked. It wasn't. He'd had a red leather collar when he left that morning. This one was blue, plain. No tags, no name. Whoever had him didn't want him recognized. Not too soon, anyway. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Why keep a dog alive for a year? Why feed him, care for him, only to tie him up where someone might find him? Detective Holbrook's voice broke through my thoughts. "This is the strongest lead we've had in months," he said. "Someone went out of their way to keep that dog alive. That someone knows what happened to your daughter." I nodded, but my eyes stayed on Buddy. His chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. Terrible. Fragile. But real. And then as I was walking back into the house later that morning, the phone rang again. The caller ID said Lakemont High School. I picked up. Marissa said, "Principal Janet Morrison. I just heard. About Buddy. I want you to know we're organizing search parties. Teachers, parents, students. We're going to search that forest." And that's when I looked out my front window and saw the first cars already arriving. People were stepping out with backpacks, maps, walkie-talkies. And one of them, standing quietly by the sidewalk wearing brand new hiking boots and a moisture-wicking shirt, was Mr. Chandler. He smiled when he saw me, and something in that smile made my skin crawl. Mr. Chandler offered to lead one of the search teams. He stepped forward with his GPS unit already in hand, said he'd studied the terrain overnight, that he'd mapped out the eastern quadrant himself. Even had a topo printout color-coded. Coach Rodriguez, the search coordinator, seemed impressed. I watched from across the kitchen table as Mr. Chandler unfolded his map, pointing to ravines and unmarked trails near Bunko Road. He said it was steep, rough country, harder to search. Claimed he'd brought flares, emergency blankets, water tablets. He didn't speak like someone volunteering. He spoke like someone with a plan. I told them I wanted to go too. I'd be damned if I sat at home while everyone else combed the woods for my daughter. But Chandler steered me toward a different section. Said I should take the northern trail, older logging roads, flatter terrain, easier on the knees. The way he said it made it sound reasonable. Respectful even. But it didn't sit right. The search area near where Buddy was found, that was east. That was where Chandler was going. Not me. Still, I agreed. For the moment. The group needed order, not suspicion. And nothing he'd said, nothing anyone had said was enough to raise alarms yet. Just instincts. Just the way he looked at that map a little too long. The way he spoke about Adrian, not like a student who'd gone missing, but like someone who'd belonged to him. I kept my eye on him as teams gathered their gear and finalized routes. He moved from group to group, calm, efficient. He handed out radios, adjusted packs, even checked water bottles. He wasn't sloppy. He was prepared, almost rehearsed. And yet none of it could be called wrong. Not out loud. When things settled into a lull, I found myself at the kitchen table again with a few of the teachers. Mr. Chandler sat beside me, map spread between us. He leaned in slightly, voice low, almost casual. Said he'd been thinking about conversations he'd had with Adrian over the past year, that she often stayed after class, talked about her future. He said she felt pressure to be perfect, that she worried she wasn't enough. I listened, nodding, though none of this had ever come from her directly. She'd never told me those things, not in those words. She was afraid she'd disappoint you, he said. She worked harder than anyone I've ever taught. Always afraid to slip. I told him she did talk about wanting to get into pre-med, but she never mentioned being afraid of me. He tilted his head almost sympathetically. Said it wasn't about fear. More like admiration. A daughter wanting to live up to a strong mother's standards. Then he mentioned the divorce. Said Adrienne had talked about it, how it unsettled her, that it made her want to regain control through grades, through routine. I froze a little. She had been 13 when her father and I split. Old enough to remember, but young enough that I'd hoped we'd protected her from the worst of it. She'd never said those things to me, not even during our hardest nights. And I didn't like that he claimed she had said them to him. The conversation shifted as others joined the table, but his tone stayed the same warm knowing, like he carried a secret. I asked how often they met for tutoring. He said Tuesdays and Thursdays, always in the science prep room. Said she preferred that space to the library, said it was quieter, less distracting. But that didn't match what I remembered. My late shifts were Mondays and Wednesdays. That's when I'd leave dinner in the fridge, knowing she had review sessions after school. I was certain of it. He shrugged it off. Said memory can play tricks. But he didn't press, just moved on, talking about how gifted she was, how she stayed late sometimes to help organize supplies. Said kinesthetic learning worked best for her hands-on repetition. He smiled, said she was one of his special students. The phrase turned my stomach, but I didn't show it. His phone buzzed on the table. Just a quick vibration and a screen notification. Before he could flip it over, I saw the preview. Stick to the plan. I didn't say anything. Neither did Mrs. Patterson, who was sitting across from us. But she looked at him, then at me, then back at her coffee. He brushed it off. Said it was probably another teacher checking in on logistics. But his voice shifted just enough for me to hear the edge. I didn't ask again. He didn't offer more. Later, after he'd stepped outside to check gear, I walked upstairs. I needed air, or space, or something. Adrienne's room was still untouched. I stood in the doorway for a long time before crossing over to her desk. She kept everything organized, color-coded pens, sticky notes in rows, her planner tucked into the side drawer. I opened it slowly, turned to September of last year. Her writing was neat, tidy like always. I flipped through the months, tracing her schedule. Her biology sessions with Mr. C were listed in blue ink, but they weren't Tuesdays and Thursdays. They were scattered mostly Mondays, sometimes Fridays. A few rescheduled with short notes, Mr. C has meeting. Moved to Wednesday. I kept reading. October 15th. Mr. C says I'm different. Special. October 22nd, earned my A today. Mr. C proud. I flipped to November. There were lunch meetings now, longer sessions. Notes like science prep room. No interruptions. Another one, Mr. C says it's better to study privately. And then this Mr. C gave me the pink bracelet today. Said it's just for me. A secret so no one gets jealous. I had never seen a pink bracelet. I turned the pages faster now, flipping through December. There were more notes, mentions of using his personal laptop. Mr. C trusts me more than the others. Our secret spot. No one else knows. Promised not to tell Jess. Jess was her best friend. December 15th took up nearly the whole page. Mr. C explained why we study alone. Said I need space to grow. That I'm not like the others, that regular school would hold me back, said we're building something together, that by senior year I'll be ready, but it has to stay private. No one would understand. I sat down on her bed planner in my lap, hands shaking. Downstairs I could hear the teams starting to gather. The front door opened and closed. Backpacks shuffled. Voices low steady, preparing to leave. I tucked the planner inside my jacket and stood. From the window, I watched Mr. Chandler cross the driveway, loading supplies into the back of his silver Honda. Calm. Methodical. I was supposed to head north with Team A, but I had no intention of following that trail. Because just before I stepped away from the window, I saw something that changed everything. Mr. Chandler's vehicle assigned to the eastern search zone was turning south, away from the forest, and away from where Buddy had been found. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving the search party, not Coach Rodriguez, not Principal Morrison, not even Mrs. Patterson, who had noticed the same strange text message I had. I just walked toward my car, like I was grabbing something, gave a small wave over my shoulder, then kept going. I turned the corner of my street and kept the silver Honda in sight, 2 cars ahead, signal blinking southbound. It didn't match the directions given for his assigned quadrant. I drove slowly, careful to stay 2 or 3 vehicles behind, letting trees and turns shield me when I could. He never once looked back. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't sneaking. But he wasn't heading toward Bunko Road either. About 3 miles down Highway 95, he pulled into a gas station. I kept driving, circled into a McDonald's lot half a mile ahead, and waited. From the mirror, I watched him stand next to his car, scan the lot like he was looking for someone. He didn't pump gas. He didn't go inside. Just stood still with that same stillness I'd seen in the kitchen. Too calm, too alert. 5 minutes passed before he got back in and pulled out. I waited until he passed, then eased onto the highway again, putting 3 cars between us this time. He turned west off the highway onto Rimrock Road. That part of town's older, mostly single-story homes with original stonework and long driveways shaded by pine and overgrown hedges. I knew it in passing. Quiet. A little forgotten. He drove about 4 miles before turning onto a gravel drive I didn't recognize. I slowed down just enough to catch the number on the mailbox, 4847. The house sat back from the road behind a thicket of rhododendrons, pale blue paint just starting to chip roof still in decent shape. It looked lived in, but not recently. I didn't stop, just kept driving another 1/4 mile until I found a wide turnout near a leaning barn with one wall half collapsed. I parked behind it, engine off, and stayed there a moment to breathe. The trees were thick enough to cover most of the walk back. I moved slow, watching where I stepped. There were still damp patches from last week's rain, but the leaves were mostly dry, so I kept to the moss line when I could. At the edge of the backyard, I crouched behind a line of cedar stumps. The gravel had fresh tracks, 2 sets, one matching the Honda, another set curved toward the back deeper, maybe a pickup. A week's worth of newspapers sat stacked near the porch, rubber bands swelling in the sun, but the yard was freshly mowed. The trim paint was new. Someone was maintaining it, but not living there. He went inside without hesitation. No fumbling with keys, no glance over his shoulder. Just walked in like he'd done it 100 times. From my angle, I could see the back side of the house where the yard sloped downward, revealing the lower level, what would have been a basement. Most of the windows down there had been sealed with glass block. Only one near the far corner was still framed in regular pane glass, small, maybe 8 inches high and 2 feet wide. A vent or something like it. And behind it, faint movement. I moved closer, staying low behind the rhododendrons. There was a gap in the curtain inside, just wide enough. I pressed my face close to the glass and cupped my hands around my eyes to block the light. What I saw inside didn't make sense at first. A desk, a whiteboard, textbooks stacked neatly in a row, a small fridge in one corner, a microwave on top, and hanging on the back of the chair, Adrian's backpack, purple with a rip on the front pocket patched with a yellow smiley face iron-on. I stared at it so long I forgot to breathe. The walls were stone, old, probably original to the house. Looked like the place had once been a root cellar. But someone had cleaned it up, new flooring, electrical wiring tucked along the ceiling, even plumbing pipe for what must have been a makeshift bathroom. Then I saw movement. He came down a staircase just out of my sight line carrying a tray. Sandwich glass of milk apple slices fanned neatly on a plate, the way Adrian always liked them. He crossed the room slowly. I could hear him now, voice low but clear through the glass. "I brought lunch," he said. "Turkey and Swiss, your favorite." There was a pause, then a soft reply, her voice. "Quiet, tired." "You miss him," Chandler said. "I know, but we couldn't risk Buddy leading them here, not yet." "You understand, don't you?" Another pause, then Adrian again. "Just a few words. Hard to make out." "Your mother still hasn't figured it out," he said, tone shifting to something softer. "But she will. When you graduate with perfect scores when you get into med school, she'll see this was all worth it." She said something else, something about homework, and his reply, "Our way is better. Traditional school was never going to let you thrive." I backed away slowly, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I kept low, crept toward the corner of the house where the HVAC unit hummed, providing just enough cover to make the call. I dialed 911 and whispered everything I'd seen. My name, my daughter's, the address. "He's got her," I said. "He's got Adrian. She's alive. She's in the basement." The dispatcher's voice was calm but firm. She asked for confirmation. I gave the street again, spelled it out. I told her I could see Adrian's backpack, that I heard her voice, that he was bringing her food. Then my foot shifted. A sharp crack split the air. I looked down. A solar light plastic casing shattered glass scattered beneath me. The back door slammed open. "I know you're there," Chandler called. "You followed me." I ran. He came after me, voice rising behind me, words slicing through the air as fast as his boots pounded the ground. "You couldn't just trust me. You never trusted what she needed." I pushed through the tree-lined branches, cutting my arms. I didn't stop. The barn came into view. My car. 40 feet. 30. I got the door open, slammed it shut, locked it just as he reached the window. He pounded on the glass. "She wants to be there," he shouted. "You'll ruin everything." I reversed hard tires, spitting gravel, and peeled out. In the mirror, I saw him run for his car. The dispatcher had my location. That was all I could hold on to. That and the image of that window. The backpack. Her voice. I took a sharp turn onto Cedar Lane. Then another. Tried to lose him through the neighborhoods, but he stayed close, weaving through traffic like a man possessed. When I finally reached the Walmart parking lot and ducked between two delivery trucks, I cut the engine and waited. I had no idea if help was on the way. No phone anymore. Just that last call and whatever the dispatcher had managed to hear. Outside, the wind picked up. Flags on the nearby storefront flapped loudly. Somewhere in the distance, sirens started to rise. I stayed still and prayed she was still alive. I didn't move for a long time after the sirens faded. My hands stayed locked around the steering wheel even after my shoulders stopped shaking. The Walmart parking lot buzzed with the usual life people pushing carts, kids bouncing in car seats, engines coming and going, but it felt distant, like I was watching it all from behind glass. I didn't have a phone. I didn't know if the dispatcher had understood everything I said before the line went dead. But eventually I saw two black and white patrol units cut across the main intersection. They weren't using lights anymore, just moving slow, deliberate. I stayed where I was until I saw a third vehicle pull in behind them, one of the unmarked SUVs used by detectives. That's when I finally let out a breath. I drove back toward Rimrock the long way, sticking to the back roads, until I was sure Chandler wasn't still out there. When I reached the house, a fourth cruiser was already parked at the bottom of the drive, angled to block the gravel path. Another officer was talking with someone through the open driver's side window of a silver Honda. I recognized the car before I saw the cuffs. Chandler was standing beside it, wrists bound, shirt, untucked hair falling limp across his forehead. He wasn't yelling, just repeating something to himself in a low voice. I parked further down the road and walked up on foot. An officer met me halfway, took my name, walked me over to Detective Holbrook without another word. They hadn't gone inside yet. They were waiting on a warrant, even with everything I'd seen. But that changed when Chandler pulled back from the cruiser and shouted, "You'll never find her unless you understand why I built it that way." That was enough for them to act. Officer Wright and another deputy circled to the back where I pointed to the window and the concrete seam around the foundation. Detective Holbrook didn't say much, just nodded once, then followed them around the house. I didn't go down there. I stayed near the tree line while they searched. I heard the call out. Got a door here, followed by the sound of a steel latch being tested. Then, after what felt like minutes stretched into hours, I heard someone say quietly, "It's her." A pause. "Adrian." No shout, no panic. Just a name. Then softer again. "It's okay. You're safe." I don't remember walking toward the house. Just the sound of my boots on gravel, one slow step after another. I saw the officers come back up from the basement with her in the center of them, thin, pale, wrapped in a blanket, her hair longer than I remembered, but dull, limp. She wasn't crying. She wasn't saying anything. She was holding a notebook in her hands, pressed flat against her chest. Her eyes scanned the yard like she didn't recognize it. They didn't let me hug her right away. She looked at me, then down again like she wasn't sure who I was. One of the paramedics asked her name. She answered, voice hoarse, said she was fine, said she had assignments due, said she needed to get back downstairs before she got behind. The medic asked what kind of assignments. She looked confused for a second, then said something about cellular mitosis, said she had a test. I rode with her in the back of the ambulance. She didn't speak, just kept her hands on that notebook, fingers white against the paper. When we got to the hospital, they took her into a quiet unit. She didn't fight them, but she didn't help either. She just followed their movements like it was all routine. They checked her vitals, drew blood, asked questions. She kept saying she needed her textbook, that she had more chapters to read, that if she didn't get through them, she might not make it into college. Later that afternoon, Detective Holbrook sat me down in a small conference room and placed Adrian's planner on the table, the one I'd taken from her desk. He'd added to it sticky notes, highlighted entries, a page marked with a photo of that pink bracelet she'd mentioned. They'd found it in a drawer in the basement next to a Ziploc bag filled with test papers and typed essays, all dated, all graded, some even marked with comments. The handwriting matched Chandler's. "There's more," Holbrook said. We recovered a laptop, external hard drive, internal hard, folders labeled by subject. She wasn't lying. He kept her on a full academic schedule: math, biology, English, essays, even college prep work. I stared at the pink bracelet in the photo. It looked cheap. Plastic beads, stretch band, a tiny silver charm shaped like a star. I'd never seen it before, but she'd written about it more than once. They let me sit with her the next day. She was sitting up in bed wearing a hospital gown that hung off her shoulders like it belonged to someone else. She had that same notebook in her lap. The first thing she asked was if I'd brought her assignments. "Mom," she said, voice flat, "I need to submit my lab reports. If I fall behind." "You're not behind," I said. "You're home." She looked at me like I'd said something untrue. Her eyes moved to the doorway like she expected someone to correct me. She whispered, "Mr. C said I was a runaway, that you wouldn't come looking, that you'd moved on." I told her that wasn't true, that I'd never stopped. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. Just stared down at the blanket, running her fingers over the hospital logo printed on the edge. That night I opened the notebook when she fell asleep. It was filled with notes, equations, paragraphs about protein synthesis. At the very back I found a page where she'd written the same line over and over again in tiny print. "Do not forget the assignment. Do not forget the assignment." 72 times. Detective Holbrook told me later that Chandler had given a full statement, said Adrian was his project, that she needed structure, that he'd rescued her from a failing system. He used words like development-gifted potential long-term academic stewardship. And when Holbrook asked him what he thought would happen when someone finally came looking, when I came looking, Chandler just said, "That's why I waited a year." It wasn't a slip. It wasn't something unraveling too fast. It was deliberate, measured, and in his mind, justified. I walked out of the interview room before the recording finished. I didn't need to hear anymore. I already knew what he'd stolen, and I knew it went beyond time. Back at the hospital, Adrian was asleep again, that same notebook resting on the tray beside her. But now it was closed. I sat in the chair beside her bed and looked around the room. Soft lighting, pale blue curtains, a folded blanket still in its packaging waiting on the shelf. That was when I saw it. On the inside cover of her notebook, beneath the printed label where her name should have been, she'd written something else in pencil. Just 2 words. Special students. The handwriting was hers, but the phrase wasn't. And I knew right then this wasn't over. Not until we understood exactly how many notebooks had been filled, and how many other students he might have called special. They held him without bail. There was no question of release, not after what they found in the basement, not after what Adrienne told the forensic team in her first taped interview. The house on Rimrock was sealed off, labeled as a crime scene, and a full forensic team moved in the next morning. I wasn't allowed inside, but I saw the photos' later rows of labeled bins, a bulletin board covered in laminated worksheets, shelving units stocked with school supplies, all arranged with an eerie sense of order. The root cellar hadn't just been converted into a classroom. It had been curated. There was a rug in the center of the floor with colored borders, like something you'd find in an elementary school reading corner. In the corner sat a locked file cabinet, and inside were neatly filed progress logs, every week documented, every assignment scored. Adrian's name appeared again and again in Mr. Chandler's handwriting. Other names were redacted, but there were hints of something larger. Notes that said, "New applicant pending evaluation," or "Needs further boundary testing before transition." They found a second bedroom across the narrow hall from Adrian's. It hadn't been used in a while. There was dust on the mattress, a lamp still unplugged, and a roll of unopened notebooks on the desk. On the wall above the bed, someone had started painting just a stripe of pale blue, halfway finished, the tape still stuck along the edges. When the forensic photographer zoomed in on the wall, they found something written underneath the paint. A single word, almost scrubbed away, Jess. That name cut through me. Jess had been Adrian's best friend since 6th grade. They'd grown apart a bit junior year, but I'd always assumed it was just normal, drifting too many classes, too many responsibilities. I asked Adrian about it gently when we were alone. Her answer was quiet, careful. Mr. C said Jess didn't understand our methods, that she got jealous. He told me not to tell her anything. I didn't push. She was still recovering, but it stayed with me. Detective Holbrook took the evidence to the school board and to Lakemont High's administration. There was no question Chandler had acted alone, but the district was nervous, more nervous than I expected. They didn't say it outright, but the subtext was clear. They were worried Adrian wasn't the only one he'd approached. When they pulled the security footage archives from the science wing, it confirmed what Adrian had written in her planner. Mondays, Wednesdays, sometimes Fridays, always after final bell, always in room 214, even when he wasn't on the tutoring schedule. That week I started calling parents. Not officially, not as part of any investigation, just quietly, parent to parent. I started with Mrs. Patterson. Then a few of the others I recognized from volunteer days, PTA meetings, back to school nights. I asked if their daughters had ever taken AP biology with Chandler. if they'd ever stayed after class. Some said no. Others paused. One mother said her daughter had stopped going to tutoring after the second session said it made her uncomfortable. Another said her child never mentioned anything but had started avoiding science electives the next semester. I asked if they still had their old school planners. Most had thrown them out. A few said they'd look. By the end of the week, 3 more students had come forward. All girls. All former students of Chandler's. None had been taken. None had disappeared. But each described something similar, subtle attention praise offers to study in private. One said she remembered him touching her shoulder a little too long. Another said he gave her an extra credit worksheet with a personal message on the back. You're capable of more than the others see. Don't waste your potential. Only Adrian had made it past the line. But he'd tested it, more than once. The district quietly announced a third-party review of staff practices. A substitute took over Chandler's classes. The school year moved on like it always does, but everything felt different. There were no tutoring sessions that spring, not for biology, not for anything. Back at the hospital, Adrian had good days and bad ones. She was eating again, slowly. She'd start a sentence, then stop halfway unsure if she was saying something wrong. She still talked about grades, college, deadlines that no longer existed. I told her those things could wait, that the world wasn't going to fall apart if she took a break. But it will, she whispered once. If I don't keep up, everything falls apart. We started meeting with Dr. Helena Morrison, a trauma specialist out of Boise. She explained that Adrian's world had been reprogrammed. A year of conditioning. A year of isolation. It wasn't just the physical captivity. It was the mental framework. She believed she had to earn her safety. That structure and control were the only way to survive. Dr. Morrison said the syndrome had a name, Stockholm, but even that word didn't feel like it fit. This wasn't just survival through attachment. This was a child trying to prove her worth in a world narrowed down to one voice, one authority. Sometimes at night, I'd find her sitting by the window in her room, the light off, notebook in her lap, just flipping through blank pages, not writing, just preparing. She asked if she could see the assignments she'd left behind. I told her the detectives had them, that they were part of the case. She asked if they'd be graded, if her transcript would still count. I didn't know how to answer. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the rescue, I returned from the grocery store and found a package on the porch. No return address, just our last name written in black ink. Inside was a sealed envelope. No letter, no explanation, just a single photograph. It showed a page from Adrian's notebook, one I hadn't seen before. It wasn't an assignment. It was a list. 6 names. 4 were girls we didn't know. 1 was Adrian's. The 6th was circled twice. Jess. I sat down right there on the porch, the photograph in my hand. And I realized we hadn't just found a survivor. We'd stepped into the middle of something that hadn't been finished. Something Chandler had started years ago, and might not have started alone. The photo didn't come from law enforcement. That much I knew the second I looked at the envelope again. No agency seal, no evidence mark, no chain of custody form. It was folded inside a plain white sleeve. No return address, just the name Ewing in careful ballpoint letters. Whoever sent it wasn't trying to scare me. They weren't trying to make a statement. It felt more like a nudge. Like someone who knew I was already close to something and wanted to make sure I kept going. I stared at the 6th name Jess circled twice in pencil, a familiar loop in the J like the way Adrian used to sign her own name. But this wasn't her handwriting. I was sure of that. The name brought something up I'd ignored. That second bedroom, the blue paint. Jess had disappeared the summer after freshman year. It was ruled a runaway. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no note. Her parents had divorced earlier that spring, and everyone said she'd been struggling. I remembered the posters on the post office window. I remembered Adrian asking if I thought Jess would ever come back. I'd said yes without really believing it, but I'd never connected the two, not until that photograph. I didn't go to the police right away. I needed something more, something that could hold up. So I called a name I hadn't spoken in years, Deb Keller, Jess's aunt. She'd lived in Coeur d'Alene back then, but had moved back to Lakemont after her sister passed away. Jess's mom never recovered from the disappearance, died from what they called complications, but everyone knew it was the slow kind, the kind that comes from grief, from never getting answers. Deb agreed to meet. We sat in her kitchen, a small place near the edge of town. She made coffee and didn't say much until I showed her the photo. She stared at it for a long time, then flipped it over. Blank. No timestamp, no watermark. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were copies of Jess's school records, report cards, teacher notes, a course schedule from freshman year. And there it was, Biology Room 214. Instructor Chandler. She stayed after class sometimes, Deb said. Told me he gave her extra science credit. I asked if she ever mentioned other students. She said there were no others. Later that afternoon, I drove to the school myself. The front office secretary knew me, everyone did by now, but still looked nervous when I asked to see the old yearbooks. She brought out 3 volumes. I flipped to the staff section, found Chandler's photo from each year, then turned to the freshman class pages. There was Jess in the second row, smiling, but not quite. I marked a few names I didn't recognize, students who'd also taken his class that year, and wrote them down on a legal pad. Back at home, I sat with Adrian after dinner. She'd gotten quieter since the envelope. She hadn't seen it, but I think she could feel something shifting. I asked her if she remembered Jess's name. She nodded. Then I asked if Mr. Chandler ever talked about Jess in class. She looked away. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her blanket. He said she wasn't ready, that she lost focus. He told me not to be like her. I didn't ask more. She was already pulling back into herself. That night I printed every page of Adrian's notebook that had been scanned into evidence. The digital copies were clearer. I looked at the margins, the scratch notes, the crossouts. In one of the earlier entries, week 4 cell division, there was a small star drawn in the corner. A 5-point star, just like the charm on that pink bracelet they found in the cellar. I remembered something Adrian said once. He told me the bracelet meant I passed the trial. I turned the page. There was another name scrawled faintly beneath a layer of erased pencil, Sarah. I pulled up the school's public archives, cross-referenced all the girls named Sarah who had taken freshman biology within 5 years of Adrian. There were 3. 1 had moved away. 1 was still in town. The third, Sarah Langston, had died in a car accident senior year, or at least that's what the record said. The next morning, I called the county clerk's office and requested a copy of the crash report. They said it wasn't available online, but I could come in and read the file myself. I drove out that same day. The report was thin, single-car, icy road, no foul play. But what stood out was the location. It wasn't on the main highway. It was out near Rimrock, the same gravel stretch Chandler's house sat off of. I circled back with Detective Holbrook. He hadn't seen the photo. I handed it over and waited while he read the names. His face changed when he got to Jess. Then again when he saw the circle around it. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "No idea," I said. "But someone thought I should have it." He ran the names. 2 were missing persons cases, both still open. 1 had moved states. But the last girl, the last name wasn't in any system. No school records, no DMV. Nothing. Holbrook wrote it down on a yellow pad and underlined it. "We might have a ghost," he said, "or someone who never made it far enough to leave a trace." We requested access to Chandler's hard drive again, this time with a different lens. not just for Adrian's files, but anything that might link to other students. Tucked deep in a hidden folder labeled Classroom Archives, we found video files, short-clipped some with no audio. The thumbnails were grainy, but the backgrounds matched the basement. One file showed a girl sitting at the desk filling out a worksheet in silence. She looked up once like she heard something, then turned back to the page. There was no sound, no timestamp, no way to know when it had been recorded. But it wasn't Adrian, and it wasn't Jess. Holbrook locked down the files and submitted them for analysis. Facial recognition metadata scans anything that could give us names. But even without that, I knew what I was seeing. He'd done this before, at least 5 times, maybe more. The paint on that second bedroom, the locked file drawer, the applicant notes in his lesson plans. It hadn't been a sudden obsession. It had been a system. And now the question wasn't how many had passed through it. It was how many never got out. They issued the warrant 3 days after the files were decrypted. The footage confirmed at least 2 unidentified girls had been recorded inside the basement classroom, one of them with a birthmark under her left eye, the other wearing a sweatshirt from a summer camp that hadn't operated since 2011. The DA didn't hesitate. Additional charges were filed: unlawful imprisonment, exploitation of a minor production of illegal media. But it wasn't just about Chandler anymore. Those girls hadn't come forward. They hadn't been found, and no one had reported them missing. That meant either they were still out there, or someone had helped keep them hidden. The task force pulled his phone records, bank statements, every rental property he'd ever owned or visited. That's when they found the cabin. It had been transferred to his name through a shell company 7 years earlier, tucked up in the woods north of Kamaya, near the Clearwater line. No utilities, no registered address. You couldn't even see it from the road. But it was there, clear as day on the satellite image. A small rectangle hidden under tree cover with a dirt track leading in from an old fire service road. The FBI took point. They didn't announce it. No press, no warnings. Just a quiet federal raid at 5:42 a.m. on a Monday. The place was cold. No power, no heat. But there were signs someone had lived there at least recently. A space heater, battery-powered, canned food stacked in crates, a twin mattress on the floor with a wool blanket still folded at the edge, and in the corner of the single-room cabin, a metal trunk. Inside, they found what they called transition materials, worksheets, notebooks, identical to the ones Adrienne had filled out, all with the same language, assignments labeled phases, self-evaluations marked pass or revise. On one of the sheets, a girl had written her name, Abby. The handwriting was careful, almost rehearsed. Underneath it was a date, August 3, 2014. That date didn't match any of the girls in the missing persons database, but it did match the year Sarah Langston died. We were beginning to think that accident report was more than just suspicious timing. Forensics pulled a partial fingerprint from the inside of the trunk lid. It didn't match Chandler's. It belonged to a woman, Jessica Lynn Keene, born 1988. Arrest record in Oregon for petty theft, no known address, no connection to the school district. But the last known employer on file, a tutoring service in Idaho Falls. The same one that had employed Chandler briefly in 2015 during a sabbatical from teaching. Detective Holbrook called me the moment they got the ID match. He didn't spell it out, but I knew what he was thinking. Chandler hadn't worked alone, and Jess hadn't just been a name on a list. She may have been the first, or the one who stayed. Adrienne hadn't spoken much in the past week. She was tired all the time, restless. The therapists said it was normal memory retrieval took a toll. But that morning, I found her awake before sunrise, sitting on the living room floor with a piece of chalk in her hand, drawing squares on the wood. 4 by 4. 16 spaces, like a grid. It's the orientation puzzle, she said quietly. From week 1. I knelt beside her, asked what it meant. You're supposed to fill the boxes based on what Mr. C says. It's about logic. But the patterns changed. I didn't understand, but I let her keep going. She filled in the first row with letters, the second with numbers, then symbols, then blank. It was a way to test if we were ready. If you got it wrong, you repeated the week. I asked how many times she repeated. Twice. But Jess, she did it more. That name again, still anchored in her memory, still connected to the worst of it. By the end of the week, federal agents had located Jessica Lynn Keene. She'd been living in a trailer outside Salmon under an alias using prepaid cards and unlisted cell phones. When they brought her in, she didn't deny anything, just asked one question. Did he get the packages? The agents didn't answer, but she talked. Not all at once, not everything, but enough. She said Chandler saved his graduates. That's what he called them. Not victims, not students, graduates. He kept files on them, tracked them, sometimes visited, sometimes sent lessons, and sometimes, when he thought they were slipping, he sent someone else to bring them back. She admitted to taking Jess from her home in 2007, said Chandler had promised it was temporary, just a test, said Jess failed the transition, said he made her paint over the walls before they moved on. When they asked her what that meant, moved on, she went silent. Just stared at the table for nearly 20 minutes before whispering, he never let them stay long if they couldn't comply. They found 2 more cabins in Idaho. One had burned down in 2016. The other had been cleared out just weeks before the raid. Same layout, same trunk, same materials. No signs of life. The DOJ filed federal charges against both of them. Interstate trafficking, conspiracy, abuse of a minor. Jessica pled guilty on all counts in exchange for full disclosure. Chandler refused to speak, refused a lawyer, refused to answer even the most basic questions. He sat in the interrogation room like he was still teaching, calm, poised, like the test was still going. When they brought Adrian in to testify, it was via closed circuit. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. She just read the dates, the assignments, the rules. And when they asked her what she remembered most, she said, "He told me I was better when I was quiet." I think that broke the room. The sentencing hearings began in late spring. Jessica got 20 years. No parole for the first 12. Chandler got life without the possibility of release. The judge used the phrase deliberate psychological reprogramming. Said the crimes went beyond control, they were structural, systemic, designed to break and rebuild. When they asked if Adrian wanted to make a statement, she declined. She didn't need to. The record spoke for itself. It's been 3 years now. Adrian's back in school community college for now, just a few classes at a time. She doesn't rush, she doesn't explain, and I don't ask her to. Some mornings I'll find her on the porch with a notebook open in her lap, not writing anything, just watching the trees move. I used to worry that meant she was stuck, but I've learned silence isn't always a sign of pain. Sometimes it's the first place healing starts. She still doesn't remember everything. The therapists say that might be a mercy. What came back was enough. The grid puzzles, the lessons, the words he made her repeat. You are only as real as the room allows. That one stuck with her the longest. She wrote it down once and then crossed it out with a thick black marker. Folded the paper in half, tucked it behind the radiator. I didn't move it. Still haven't. The state offered us relocation services, therapy grants, even witness protection at one point. We didn't take it. We stayed. Because the people who hurt her built their lives in secrecy, in hidden places. I wanted her to live in the open. The house feels different now. Not broken, not haunted. Just quieter. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, just settled. Buddy never came back. They think he was used to lure her that morning, then let loose. But every time we drive past the trailhead, Adrian checks the edge of the woods, just in case. There are still days when I feel that heaviness return, when I pass the school parking lot or see a young girl walking alone and wonder if anyone's watching. if someone like Chandler is out there again. But then I remember what the prosecutor said during sentencing. He didn't operate in darkness, he created it. And the only thing that breaks that kind of structure is light. It stayed with me. People ask how we're doing. I usually say, we're steady. Not better, not fine, just steady. That's the truth. Healing is quiet work. It doesn't look like what you see on the news or in courtroom clips. It looks like brushing your daughter's hair again for the first time in months. Like making breakfast without checking the locks 3 times. Like planting something in the yard and not thinking about who might walk by. Jessica Keene is still serving her sentence. I read once that she started painting in prison. Landscapes, mostly. I don't know what to make of that. I don't forgive her, but I don't carry her anymore either. That weight belongs to the system that ignored the signs, the school that overlooked the patterns, the man who built his sickness into structure. Adrienne's story is not about what was taken. It's about what endured. She is still here. Her voice may be softer now, but it's hers. No one scripts her anymore. No one decides what she says, or remembers, or becomes. And if you're listening to this, if her story stayed with you, share it. Not for attention, not for drama, but so that no other girl sits in silence while the world calls it normal. No name should disappear without notice. Not hers, not anyone's.